A year ago, Ellie Harmon, the quiet girl of Windermere, was found at the foot of Waterloo Bridge, her body drifting silently in the freezing river. There were no signs of a struggle, no farewell note, just a girl who vanished in the night, leaving a town whispering in unresolved grief. They called it a tragedy. But then a forgotten recording was unexpectedly played, voices that should never have been heard, and the truth slowly emerged. Ellie didn't die in an accident. She was lured into a play, and someone wrote the script. The sun hadn't even peeked over the horizon when crows began to caw raucously along the banks of the Waterloo River. A thin mist floated above the water, shimmering silver under the still hurrying streetlights. On the bridge, Mr. Glenn, a familiar fisherman in Windermere, quietly prepared his fishing rod as he did every morning. The river wind was strange today, carrying a brackish smell and a cold that seeped into the bones. Mr. Glenn was baiting his hook when he suddenly stopped. There was something, caught between the two bridge pillars below, a gray floating object. He squinted. His heart pounded as he realized it was in the shape of a human being, a pale white hand dangling in the current. 2 hours later, the area around the bridge was cordoned off. Police cars lined up, their flashing lights like cuts across the mist. Forensic staff, divers, and local police officers arrived one by one. When the body was brought up, everyone fell silent. Female, young. Her dark brown hair was still sparsely wet, tangled, and clinging with debris from the riverbed. Her beige fleece jacket was intact, and her sneakers were found washed ashore not far away. On her neck, a faint purple mark stretched across, like an invisible cut between life and death. The silence was broken only by a weak whimper. A small dog, white with curly fur, was trembling near the riverbank, its front leg limping. "Clover," an officer whispered, "Ellie Harmon's dog." Identification took only a few minutes. The body was Ellie, the girl who had disappeared 3 days earlier, 19 years old. No boyfriend, no debts, no apparent reason to vanish. But now, the truth emerged like a cold blade. Chief Nolan quietly took notes as a middle-aged man in a dark overcoat stepped out of a police car. He walked slowly, his heels clicking softly on the damp stone. It was Mr. Harmon, Ellie's father. No one had called him, but he came, as if he knew in advance. "Mr. Harmon, an officer began, but was interrupted. "I know," he replied, his eyes fixed on the body covered with a white sheet. "She lived her life her way, and died the same way. Not a single tear, not a hint of emotion." Chief Nolan tilted his head. "We need you to answer a few questions." "Ask away," he replied. No one said anything more, but in the eyes of those around him, a seed of suspicion had been planted. Silently, fiercely, like an underground stream beneath the winter ice. That evening, Windermere was shrouded in dim yellow light. The news spread quickly, seeping through every window, every family meal, every late-night call between friends and neighbors. Ellie Harmon, the quiet girl, often absent from class gatherings who preferred reading to partying, was dead, and no one knew why. Behind the whispers was a truth that no one dared to speak aloud. Ellie wasn't the type to run away in the middle of the night. And if she was dead, who had brought her to that bridge, and for what reason? Number 12. Maple Street stood quietly in the characteristic gray of Windermere's winter. Chief Nolan stepped onto the top step, carefully wiping his feet before knocking on the door. With him was Officer Claire, young, sharp, with eyes that missed no detail. The door opened after 3 knocks. Mr. Harmon stood there, back straight, gray shirt tucked in, no tie, eyes unblinking. "We need to look through Ellie's room," Nolan said, his voice even. "Be my guest," he replied, stepping aside to let them pass, then quietly returning to the kitchen. The air inside carried an old smell, the smell of damp wood and paper. The living room had no decorations other than a grandfather clock stopped at 3:17. Everything was too neat, as if no one lived here, only existed. Claire lightly ran her hand over the coffee table, dust-free. A house so clean it was unusual. Ellie's room was on the second floor. The door wasn't locked. Claire was the first to enter, and immediately noticed that the quiet here was different from the quiet outside. Light blue walls, a few old posters hung crookedly. The bookshelf was full, no books hastily pulled out. The bed was neatly made. The pillow had a slight indentation, as if Ellie had just left this morning. Nolan walked to the desk. A framed photo lay face down, the only thing that didn't match the overall tidiness. Claire gently flipped it over, a photo of Ellie and her mother on a picnic, the brown-haired woman hugging her daughter, smiling brightly. Next to it was a dried-up paintbrush and an open jar of watercolor paint. No signs of a struggle, Claire observed. Doesn't look like anyone was rummaging through anything either. Nolan nodded, but pointed to the desk drawer. Empty. Claire frowned. Her diary was kept here. I read it in the scholarship application. Ellie wrote in it every day. Nolan turned his head downward. So, who took it? And when? Footsteps echoed behind them. Mr. Harmon stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, expressionless. I didn't know Ellie had a diary, he said. She never shared anything. We heard you two had an argument recently? Claire asked directly. He was silent for a second too long, then replied softly, What girl that age doesn't rebel? Do you remember what day that was? Nolan interjected. 3 days ago. She said she wanted to leave. I said fine. You didn't ask why? I don't interfere in her life. After her mother died, Ellie lived like a stranger in her own home, and I let her be. The statement was decisive, but not without cracks. Claire looked at him, her eyes not accusing, just as if she were looking at a closed door. After he left, Claire again searched the bedside table drawer. She pulled out the bottom drawer and found an old file folder tucked deep under a layer of printed paper. Carefully taking it out, she opened it slightly. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper titled Life Insurance Policy, Anne Harmon. The beneficiary section was crossed out in red pen, handwritten replacement, Harmon, Ellie. Claire immediately went downstairs. Mr. Harmon, she called, her voice low. He turned his head, his eyes darkening when he saw the paper. This insurance card, why was it crossed out and rewritten by hand? And why was it in Ellie's room? A fleeting frown passed over his face. I don't know, maybe it was printed like that. The original listed you as the beneficiary, now it's Ellie. But in the company's records, the beneficiary section is blank. Do you know anything about this? No. Claire was silent for a few seconds. Were you planning to withdraw the money? Yes, after she disappeared. I was going to use the money for emergencies. Nolan chimed in, but there was no proof Ellie was dead at that point. Mr. Harmon didn't answer. His hand trembled slightly. Leaving the Harmon house, Claire sat in the car for a long time. The river wind still howled through the trees. She flipped back and forth through the photo of Ellie and her mother. There was something in that smile that hadn't disappeared but was waiting to be deciphered. A father who didn't cry, a room that wasn't messy, a diary that disappeared, and an insurance policy that was wiped clean. Everything was too perfectly silent, as if Ellie's death was a chapter that someone had meticulously written, and the first to read it was the last to be buried. Waterloo Bridge that afternoon seemed to fall silent under the gray ash sky. The cold wind blew through the gaps in her clothes, chilling her to the bone. But on the bridge railing, candles still burned. At the foot of Ellie's photo, propped up with a wooden board, wildflowers and handwritten messages were arranged in a silent circle. Mason arrived early. He didn't say anything to anyone, just quietly lit a candle and stepped back a few paces, standing close to a tree trunk, his hands in his pockets. Since leaving town to study at university, then working in a small city 3 hours away, he rarely returned to Windermere. But today, something in Ellie's death made him unable to sit still. Not exactly close friends, But Ellie was the only one in their class who would listen when Mason talked about the books he loved. They did presentations together and quietly waited for the bus at the stop after extra classes. Ellie had a way of smiling very lightly, as if she didn't want to bother anyone with her emotions. Footsteps pulled Mason out of his reverie. Noah Ellis, tall, with thick black hair, wearing a hooded fur coat, approached from the other side of the bridge. He stopped in front of the photo, bowing his head for a long time. No tears, just a sadness that was just right, as if tailored. "Hi, everyone," Noah said softly, his voice deep. "I still can't believe it." A girl hugged him, sobbing. Mason watched from afar. Noah stroked her hair, patted her back gently, his eyes still fixed on Ellie's face in the photo. Was it the look of someone who had lost something, or of someone who was acting like they had lost something? Mason didn't know, but something made him uncomfortable, as if every movement of Noah's had been considered in the mirror. A few minutes later, another young man arrived quietly. Tyler Marsh. Small stature, light blonde hair, a gaze that always seemed to avoid contact. He didn't approach anyone, just laid down a sprig of lilac and stepped back. When Tyler's eyes met Mason's, they nodded to each other, reluctantly, distantly. They used to be a group, Noah, Tyler, Ellie, and fleetingly, Mason. But after high school, everyone went their own way. The news of Ellie's death brought them together again, like dust particles blown by the wind to the same place, not to reunite, but to look back at what was lost. "Do you guys remember?" A female voice rang out in the group. Ellie used to say that if she died, she hoped her ashes would be scattered on Waterloo. She was joking, but now I think. No one answered, not because of the meaningless words, but because everyone felt that it could be true. A few soft laughs rose as if to soothe the atmosphere. People began to tell old stories, small fragments of memories about Ellie, the handmade dress she wore at the school festival, the presentation about Dostoevsky that made her blush because she forgot the ending. Mason turned his head, his eyes slowly stopping on the person who had just asked. The statement seemed out of place in the crowd, but it was like a needle falling into a flat surface of water, stirring up memories he didn't want to remember. A week ago, during coffee with Noah and Tyler, a meeting that Mason still thought was accidental, Noah said in a casual tone when mentioning Ellie, "She called me that night, sobbing, like it was the biggest role of her life." At that time, Mason just smiled awkwardly. He didn't know if he was uncomfortable with the way Noah spoke, or with what that statement evoked. But now, amidst the sound of the wind blowing through the memorial, he realized it wasn't a joke. It was a piece of the puzzle, and it just fit into what was gradually being revealed. No one answered immediately. Noah turned, paused slightly, then nodded slightly. "Right. She texted me asking if I was free. I was busy, so I didn't meet her." "So, you didn't know she was in trouble?" Noah smiled faintly, his shoulders shrugging slightly. "Who knows? Ellie might text just to ask about a classic literature essay. I thought she was okay." Another silence. But for Mason, that one sentence suddenly made something click in his head, like a light switch flipping in the darkness. Last week, one Wednesday afternoon, the coffee shop on the edge of town, Mason accidentally met Noah and Tyler there. They invited him to sit with them. A strange conversation, both light and confusing. Noah said he was writing a short film script about a character who was killed in a small town. Tyler laughed awkwardly, saying it was a morbid joke. Mason didn't pay attention, but now he remembered. Noah once said, half-jokingly, "If someone disappears in Waterloo, they have to be buried with their phone. Otherwise, everything will be exposed." At the time, everyone laughed. But today, Ellie was pulled from Waterloo, and her phone wasn't found. Mason shuddered, not because of the wind, but because a question was growing within him. What if it wasn't a joke? He looked back at Noah, who was talking, smiling slightly, accepting condolences from others. His hands were in his pockets, his fingers tapping unconsciously on the bridge railing. A steady beat, like the ticking of a clock leading to a pre-calculated moment. A few more leaves fell from the trees above, thin, unable to block the gaze of the living, and unable to cover anything if the person standing below knew how to hide in the shadows. The investigation room was on the second floor of the Windermere Police Department, an old red brick building built in the 40s. On the investigation board, Ellie's photo was pinned in the center. Below the photo was a temporary diagram, street names, relationships, locations. The red lines intertwined like a maze with no way out. Claire looked at them, her eyes blinking slowly, her hand lightly twirling the pen between her fingers. Her intuition, the thing that had always made her trusted in previous small cases, seemed suffocated this time. "Nothing's clear," she muttered. The door burst open. Nolan walked in, a thick file in his hand, his face tense. "We have more information about Mr. Harmon," he said without preamble. Claire sat up straight. "What is it?" He tried to withdraw a portion of the money from his wife's insurance account, the type that pays out when the official beneficiary is missing or deceased. Right after Ellie disappeared, Nolan nodded. Exactly on the second day, less than 48 hours later, too fast to be a natural reaction, Claire breathed out. He said he just wanted to prepare for emergencies, but that shows. He believed Ellie was dead. And that's the problem, Nolan said, placing the file on the table. His lawyer argued Ellie had threatened to run away many times. No contact after 2 days doesn't prove she's dead, and the police haven't announced anything official. Claire frowned. So, he might have known in advance? Exactly. But it's still not enough to press charges. A short silence. Nolan slowly flipped through the file further. There's one more detail. We found a long strand of black hair in Mr. Harmon's trunk. It doesn't match Ellie, not his hair. We're checking the DNA, but nothing specific. Claire raised her eyebrows. Not Ellie's? Number three, it makes everything more complicated. She rested her chin on her hand, staring at Ellie's photo. In the photo, the young girl tilted her head slightly, her eyes as if looking at something beyond the lens. A look not of someone who was afraid, but of someone who was used to living with the unspeakable. Claire stood up, walking towards the board. She took a red pen, lightly drawing a line from Mr. Harmon's name to the finance section. The line hadn't gone anywhere. Not dark enough, but enough to make her more confused. Late that evening, when everyone left the room, Claire stayed behind. Outside, snow began to fall sporadically. Winter had truly arrived. She sat down, gathering the files, just about to turn off the lights when she heard a soft knock on the door. Mason. He stood in the hallway, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his thick coat. The neon lights cast a tired look on his face, but his eyes were still bright, like someone carrying a decision they had pondered for too long. "I have something," he said, his voice small. Claire stepped out, nodding slightly. "It would be better to talk somewhere else." Mason nodded. They went outside to the coffee shop across from the station, the only shop open late in this town. No one ordered anything. They sat in a dark corner amidst the hum of the coffee machine. Mason was a Windermere High School student when Claire first moved to town to intern at the police station. At that time, she was just a young intern who often sat in the library to read old files and drink coffee from the vending machine. Once, Mason, who was volunteering at the library, helped her find a lost file. They weren't close, but after a few encounters and a few trivial conversations, Claire remembered the young man with keen eyes who always asked questions that went beyond the scope of an outsider. When Mason appeared that night in the hallway of the police station, Claire wasn't completely surprised, just didn't think he would appear at this time, with a face like he was holding a secret heavier than a statement. "I'm not sure if this means anything," Mason began, placing his phone on the table. "Last week I met Noah and Tyler at the coffee shop. They talked about a short film script. Kind of joking, kind of not. I thought it was strange, so I turned on the recorder. But then I forgot about it. Claire tilted her head slightly. What kind of script? Mason pressed play. A light crackling sound rang out, the background noise of the coffee shop, mixed with laughter and the clinking of porcelain. So if you stage the scene like it's real, strangling, throwing the body in the water, and say you're filming art, who's going to suspect anything? Claire stiffened. And if there's insurance money in the case, it's even more logical. Another voice, deeper, hesitant, spoke. What are you worried about? I'll take care of the staging. Just let her believe she's doing art. Laughter, then faded away. Claire turned off the machine, looking up at Mason. That voice is Noah. And the other person? Tyler. A heavy silence. Claire said slowly, "Have you given this clip to anyone yet?" Number I. Wasn't sure who to trust. Claire nodded, for the first time feeling the convergence between professional instinct and personal feeling. In Mason's eyes, an outsider, seemingly unrelated, was something that those wearing too perfect a facade like Noah didn't have. Authenticity. "Thank you," she said, her voice softening. This could be a turning point. And when Mason left the shop, Claire stayed behind. In her mind, she was no longer thinking about Mr. Harmon, the man who was silent to the point of helplessness. She was thinking about Noah and that voice. It wasn't just talking about a plan. It was describing exactly what had happened. And between the silent dots of the investigation, Claire had just heard the first hyphen leading to the truth. Meeting room number 4 of the Windermere Police Department today had only 3 people sitting there. Chief Nolan, Investigator Claire, and Mason. The only non-industry man ever invited to this place not to testify, but to reveal what the entire investigation team was missing. The recording device was placed in the middle of the table, Mason's phone fully charged, the screen lit up under the yellow light. Claire had listened to this recording 4 times last night, but this time she needed Nolan and the entire legal system behind him to listen as well. "Are you ready?" Claire asked, her eyes on Mason. He nodded, his shoulders slightly tense. She pressed play. The noisy sounds of the coffee shop flooded in, sporadic laughter, spoons touching cups, the sound of chairs shifting slightly. "So, if you stage the scene like it's real, strangling, throwing the body in the water, and say you're filming art, who's going to suspect anything?" Noah's voice, clear, confident, as if he were presenting an idea for a viral video, not describing a murder. Then the recording continued to run until it ended. Nolan frowned. He leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving. "This clip. When did you record it?" Mason replied. "Last week. At Starbeans, corner of 6th Street. I didn't mean to record it secretly, I just thought it was strange." Claire looked straight at Nolan. "Now listen to the next clip, Chief. There's a detail that's very close to the real situation." She turned on the machine. A longer pause, then Noah continued to speak, smaller, as if bowing his head close to the table. "No trace on the skin. The cold water will do the rest." Nolan looked up, his gray eyes like December frost. "What?" Claire repeated. "No trace on the skin." "He knows," Nolan muttered. "He knows the body will be in the water and understands the effect of cold temperature on post-mortem skin tissue." Claire nodded. "And this detail has never appeared in the media. Only the police and forensics know that the mark on Ellie's neck was faint, partly because the cold water contracted the muscles, slightly erasing the mark." Nolan leaned close to the table. "We can call this knowledge of crime, a sign that the speaker has information that only the perpetrator would know." Claire moved to the end. The voice became difficult to hear. The sound of the coffee machine rang out, overwhelming it. But if you listened carefully, there was a whisper. "Not Noah, not Mason." "Are you sure?" "She trusts you." Nolan frowned. "Tyler, it could be him, but the voice Sounds scared. Claire nodded. Or regretful. Then, the final part. Noah, again, Noah, laughing softly, whispering, "She thinks we're filming art. It's time to shoot the ending." No one said anything for a few minutes after the tape stopped. Nolan was the first to speak. "We can apply for a warrant. We have preliminary motive, indications of knowledge of the scene, and at least one audio evidence." Claire nodded. "I'll get the records of Noah's film location rentals, check the filming permits, co-stars. I'll also ask Tyler. He's easier to sway." Mason stood up, about to leave the room, but Nolan stopped him. "You are the only one who saw this was unusual, right?" Mason hesitated slightly. "I'm not sure what I saw, but Ellie was someone who believed in others. If she texted Noah that night, it's definitely because she believed she would be safe." Claire looked at Mason, her eyes no longer like with a witness, but like with a newly awakened teammate. And that's what killed her. That very day, the investigation team began to act. Claire obtained a warrant to track Noah and Tyler's phones. Voice analysis software was installed, comparing the audio sample with public conversations on social media, matching up to 93%. A list of the filming equipment Noah had rented in the last 3 months was compiled. An old walkie-talkie on the list was purchased online. The delivery address was not his home, but an anonymous mailbox in the next town. They also investigated Noah's previous rehearsals of filming. One of them, according to witnesses, had asked the co-star to pretend to suffocate. One girl withdrew from the shoot because she felt uncomfortable. Claire drew another line on the board. "Real script. Ellie is the only actress who doesn't know she's playing the victim for real." At the end of the day, Claire left the station. It was snowing. The wind blew white swaths across the small town. She stopped at the bus stop, where Ellie used to wait every afternoon. On the waiting bench, an old woman was quietly picking snow off a small photo pasted on the glass. A picture of Ellie, a gentle face, faraway eyes. Claire closed her eyes slightly. The voice on the tape still rang in her head. "It's time to shoot the ending." And she knew. This game wasn't for filming. It was an unpronounced sentence, and those behind it had stepped into the light. It had been 3 days since the police department officially launched the secret tracking operation. No widespread internal announcements, no calling it a criminal investigation, just collecting extended data. Enough not to stir up public opinion in a town easily disturbed by rumors. Claire was assigned to track Noah. Not difficult. He rarely changed his habits. He stopped at the coffee shop at the end of the street in the morning, went home early in the afternoon, and often frequented an old bar called Roscoe's at the end of Jefferson Street in the evening. The thing was, almost no one frequented Roscoe's anymore, except for a few guys who liked to drink alone. The security cameras here, according to City Hall records, had stopped working more than 2 months ago. Claire sat in the car, the window lowered partially, binoculars in hand. From a distance of 2 blocks, she watched Noah enter Roscoe's, his gait calm, his hands in his coat pockets, not looking back. An hour later, he came out, empty-handed, his face not flushed from drinking, his eyes not cloudy. Claire took notes, an old habit from when she was a police academy trainee. What people don't do is sometimes more important than what they show. Tyler was different. He didn't follow any habits. During the first 2 nights of tracking, the surveillance team only saw Tyler hanging around the house, sometimes riding his bike around the park a few times and then going home. But on the 3rd night, a night with a new moon as thin as a scratch on the sun, he went out at nearly 2 a.m. No car, no one with him. Just a small backpack, an old walkie-talkie attached with a coil cord hooked on his hip. Claire received a signal from her teammates. She changed direction, with 2 other officers taking turns following. Tyler wasn't walking fast, but deliberately taking small roads, through the alley behind the bakery, around the old bus stop, along the slope towards the Waterloo Bridge area. Under the willow tree close to the riverbank, Tyler stopped. Claire turned off the car lights, holding her breath. Less than 30 meters away, she saw him take out the walkie-talkie, pressing it close to his mouth. The signal transmitted to the handheld recording center. No one suspects anything. Everything is still according to plan. The statement hit Claire's ears like a neat punch to the chest. Not loud, but unforgettable. She bit her lip, noting the time. The signal was clear. No wind, no mixed noise. Just one voice. And when she returned to the station, opened the recording from Mason's phone, the whispered statement at the end of the tape. "Are you sure? She trusts you. And now, no one suspects anything." Claire understood what her intuition had been screaming for days. It was the same person. Tyler. Not the proactive one, but the one who knew and still continued to play the role. The next morning, an emergency meeting was held in a closed room. Claire presented her findings, her voice not shaking, but her eyes still showing sorrow. Tyler is reenacting old behaviors, still communicating with someone, possibly Noah. Last night's statement matches almost completely with the voice on the recording. And the language, plan, shows organized action. Nolan sat silently for a long time. Then he said softly, "We're not investigating a single murder case. We're tracing a staging, a script, just like they said." Claire nodded, not happy. Just felt a chill down her spine. Because the one who killed Ellie wasn't simply someone who lost control, but someone who knew exactly what they were doing, from planning to every line of dialogue. And Ellie was just the only one who thought she was making a movie. No one said anything more in the meeting room that day. But from that day on, the tracking operation was no longer collecting data. It became a hunt, silent, precise, and with no room for error. That evening, Claire sat alone in her office, the recording playing for the 9th time. She rewound Tyler's voice, Noah's voice, and then the 3.7-second section with no sound, just the sound of the wind. But this time, she heard a very small noise, like the sound of a door latch clicking, or the sound of a camera turning on, and she knew everything had been recorded. The question was no longer who killed Ellie, but who had directed that death and was still staging the aftermath for a next act. The wind whistled through the thin wooden gaps of the old motel on the edge of town. Room 6. A second floor. Didn't look special from the outside. Curtains drawn, nameplate rusted, lock loose. But Claire knew very well. This was where Noah Ellis had rented on the night Ellie disappeared, and might be where all the plays had been staged. The search warrant was signed just hours after the emergency meeting ended. They couldn't risk wasting any more time. If anything ever existed here, evidence, props, or even memories, it had to be found before Noah had a chance to clean up. Police broke in at nearly 2 a.m., the exact time they knew Noah was usually fast asleep at his own house. Claire and 3 members of the forensic team entered with specialized flashlights, every movement as if touching a secret. The room reeked of moisture. The wallpaper peeled off in patches. The wooden floor creaked softly under each step. Everything seemed harmless. A messy bed, an empty suitcase, a few scraps of paper. But it was inside the old wardrobe, behind a dusty raincoat, that the first thing made Claire's heart clench. A black plastic box, labeled Film Project 03, was unusually heavy. When they opened it, they found a thick roll of rope, a few boxes of fake blood, the kind used for stage gore, and a small necklace, a heart shape, with a broken chain. Claire picked it up with tweezers. There was a dark stain on the lock. Not much, but enough for the naked eye to recognize that it wasn't the color of artificial blood. She looked closely. On the back of the pendant was engraved E.H. Ellie Harmon. A forensic expert said softly, "It can't be a coincidence." Claire didn't answer. She had stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago. They continued to search the room. On the ceiling, near the window, a mini camera was cleverly mounted, neat and submerged in the wooden frame. Claire pulled it down, checking the memory card slot. Empty. No memory card, a forensic expert reported after checking the slot. Possibly removed after filming, or after Ellie was gone, Claire said softly, her voice seeming to get lost in the old wood-smelling room. She turned towards the old desk, running her hand along the edge of the third drawer, where the paint was peeling in patches, the hinge creaking. One drawer was stuck. Claire used a thin blade to pry it open gently, hearing a soft click. Inside were a few old batteries, scratch paper, and a clear plastic bag rolled up neatly. She pulled it out. Inside, a small memory card, unlabeled, covered with a thin layer of dust, but still intact. Could be a backup copy, an expert commented, or a spare card. Claire nodded slightly, without speaking, but in her heart she understood. Maybe they were too confident, or simply careless, because they thought no one could touch this room. At the department's laboratory, Claire and a technical expert sat in a closed room, the large screen connected to a data recovery machine. Everyone was silent when the first video appeared, blurry, shaking slightly, but clear enough that no one could mistake the face of the girl in the frame. Ellie. She stood in the room, the same motel room just searched. Beige jacket, hair tied to the side, white sneakers muddy. She smiled, a little shy. "Is it recording yet?" Ellie's voice rang out, small but clear. Noah's voice, not seen, replied, "Yes, just like the rehearsal. This scene is a little different, but you'll do well." Ellie nodded. She stepped into the middle of the room. The camera shook slightly as it was adjusted. Noah continued, "When I give you the rope, you take it. Pretend you're tying it around your neck, like the character is struggling psychologically. But don't pull it tight." Ellie laughed softly. "I'm not stupid. Yeah, this scene will be very real." The video ended there. Claire sat silently. No one in the room could say a word, because that video wasn't a staged scene. It was the opening of a murder disguised as art. That day, the forensic report also confirmed the blood sample on the necklace was Ellie's, and the rope in the prop box had fibers matching the faint mark on the victim's neck. The conclusion was undeniable. But for Claire, the scariest thing wasn't in the physical evidence. It was in Ellie's eyes when she stepped into the frame. The eyes of someone who believed she was being given an opportunity to do something big, different, to escape the silence of the town, the father who didn't listen, and the repressed memories. That belief in Noah's camera lens had become a tool to manipulate, betray, and kill. Claire turned off the screen. Her hands were still shaking slightly. This was no longer a murder case. This was the crime of someone who took the trust of others to write the script for a tragedy that viewers only learned about in the final scene. It was a freezing February night. Tyler Marsh left the city at midnight. His backpack sealed behind him. His steps hurried, but not long. A white car stopped slowly by the road. He waved and jumped in. The streetlight shone brightly through the car glass, reflecting the deep panic inside his face. Just a few minutes later, that car had disappeared from the lens of the area's traffic cameras. But it couldn't escape the phone tracking system that the police had set up long ago. Claire discovered the location. She and an investigation team immediately set out, following the car to an old motel near Totem Lake, about 20 minutes' drive from Windermere. They burst in when Tyler was sitting quietly in the room, his face pale, sweat pouring down his forehead, his hands trembling. On the table, the old walkie-talkie and a few small boxes containing rope and mini cameras. "Tyler Marsh, you are under arrest on suspicion of involvement in the death of Ellie Harmon. You have the right to remain silent." Claire read the warning. Her face was stern, but her eyes were full of sympathy. She knew the person in front of her wasn't really dangerous, but was an important link. Tyler was escorted back to the station. The interrogation room was a small cubicle, only a few square meters, the dim yellow light shining on the peeling white wall. He was lightly tied to a chair, his head slightly bowed. On the table, Mason's recording, video clips from the mini camera, the dark necklace and rope, physical evidence that couldn't be denied. Nolan, Claire, and Prosecutor Henderson sat opposite him. All the first questions faltered, sinking into the oppressive silence of the room. Just a few minutes later, the first tear fell on the paperwork, from Tyler's eyes. "I didn't mean to kill Ellie." He turned his head up, his voice choking. "The idea was just to scare her so she'd move out so we could get the insurance money." The prosecutor frowned. "Can you explain in more detail?" Tyler lost his composure. "The whole plan was Noah's idea. I just helped him stage the filming, prepare a video real enough for Ellie's father to believe and withdraw the money. I didn't mean to kill her. I'm sorry." Claire nodded gently. "Can you tell us about the events of that afternoon? The afternoon Ellie disappeared." Tyler looked up. "I brought the filming equipment to the motel, filmed her trying out the scene, then Noah wouldn't stop." He looked down. "Ellie found out the truth when she saw the necklace fall. She panicked, tried to run away." Tyler was silent, opening his mouth as if wanting to say more. Then he burst into choked sobs. "Maybe it was hard. I heard her call my name. Tyler. Tyler, save me." I closed my eyes tight. I stood there. Tears fell. Like a coward. An investigator listening shuddered. The flickering light outside the interrogation room window flickered, reflecting dimly on the tragic face. Tyler wasn't the only perpetrator, but he played an undeniable role in Ellie's downfall. Prosecutor Henderson tapped lightly on the table. "You survived because you told the truth, but you will still have to pay for your mistakes." Claire looked at Tyler, not punishing, not contemptuous, just an acknowledgement. Remorse had made him sleepless, constantly asking himself whether, if, then, he could have saved her. The next day, a preliminary report was sent to the prosecutor's office, with information on the faults and responsibilities of each person stamped accurately. Noah would be investigated as the mastermind, the one who planned it. Tyler was an accomplice, the one who assisted the plan, tracked and staged it. As for Mr. Harmon, he was no longer under formal investigation. But for Claire, what was more important was that she heard deep inside Tyler's mind a soft sob, inaudible, but ringing out like an endless internal interrogation. She trusted us. That night, as snow fell silently on Windermere again, Claire returned alone to Waterloo Bridge. On the railing, there were still faint traces of dried blood. The police had used soft cloth to block the bridge, but she took a few photos as evidence. She looked at the lights reflected on the river, bowed down, lowered herself and whispered, "Ellie, if you can hear me, I won't stop until the truth is brought to light." The cold wind swept through, as if someone brushed past her, but she knew the breath of the one behind that case couldn't escape forever. The end wasn't far off, because finally, the truth had found a voice, through tears of regret, through silent videos, and through the trembling confession of a soul that couldn't bear guilt. Noah was arrested the next morning at his home. Police burst in as he was sitting drinking coffee, his laptop open in front of him. The screen stopped on a page writing about the psychology of the villain in indie films. When he was handcuffed, he didn't scream, didn't resist with force, but his eyes carried an uncomfortable arrogance. The interrogation room was kept dimly lit, with only the ceiling light shining directly down on the cold metal table. Claire sat on one side, the file placed neatly. Noah sat on the opposite side, his hands clasped together, his head slightly raised, not tired, not afraid, just as if waiting for an interview for a new film project. "Do you know why you're here?" Claire began, her voice even. Noah shrugged. "Probably because I have too many ideas that exceed the limits of ordinary imagination." "No," Claire replied, "because a girl died, and the evidence is pointing at you." Noah smiled faintly. "Evidence, a very beloved word around here." Claire opened the laptop, pressing play on the audio clip. Noah's voice rang out, deep, calm, as if telling a joke. No trace on the skin. The cold water will do the rest. She'll think she's filming art. When the sound stopped, Claire looked straight into his eyes. Do you want to explain anything? Noah tilted his head as if analyzing a line of dialogue that wasn't in rhythm. Do you know good actors often don't realize when they're living for real? They think everything is a role. Ellie believed she was doing something meaningful. And you took advantage of that to kill her? Claire said, emphasizing her voice for the first time. Noah shook his head, laughing. I didn't kill anyone. I created an experience, like a subversion of norms. Do you see how Ellie's death is making the whole town come alive? That's a success. Claire narrowed her eyes. You call that death a success? Noah leaned forward, whispering, have you ever thought, is pain the only way people remember each other longer? Claire clenched her hands under the table. What about the video? The necklace with blood? The room you rented full of props, hidden cameras, and ripped diary pages? Noah crossed his arms. I'm not responsible for lost props. As for the diary, I didn't write Ellie's emotions. She already had the trauma. I simply put it at the right angle. Claire stood up. She didn't need to hear more. You have the right to remain silent, she said, her voice low. But soon, people will hear Ellie's voice in the last video, and then they'll know who the real director of this tragedy is. Noah smiled, as if he was waiting for that closing statement. And you're going to frame me as the absolute villain in the story, right? Claire stopped at the door, not turning back. I'm just telling the truth. The rest, let justice speak for itself. The Windermere County Courthouse, a quiet gray stone building in the middle of the central square, had never been as crowded as it was that morning. The steps in front of the courthouse were packed with people, old, young, people who knew Ellie, people who had only seen her pass by on the street. But all came here for one thing, to hear the truth, to look at the faces of those who had plunged a young girl into the night, and perhaps to forgive, if that was possible. Inside, the preliminary hearing took place in an atmosphere as tense as a bowstring. The public seats were full, local journalists sat in rows. Claire quietly sat at the end, clutching her notebook, in which were the last lines she had ever written about Ellie. Notes that were not legalistic, but emotional. Things that she didn't want to forget. Moments that made her feel more human than investigator. Noah Ellis still maintained the same attitude since his arrest. Throughout the first hearing, he kept a stone-cold face, his eyes unwavering. Beside him, the defense attorney sat sternly, but from the way he held the file, it could be seen that he knew. This case couldn't be won. Tyler Marsh sat one seat away, his face pale, his hair messed up, his eyes not daring to meet anyone. He had tried to run away, had been silent, but in the end, he was the first to blurt out the truth. And today, he would hear it again, from Mason's own mouth. Mason stepped up to the witness stand. He wore a light blue shirt, no tie, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it on the Bible to swear. Can you recount why you approached the police? The prosecutor asked, her voice as soft as if afraid to break the tense atmosphere. Mason nodded. I used to be Ellie's classmate. We weren't as close as in middle school, but we still texted occasionally. She wasn't easy to open up, but she was always kind. He took a breath. I accidentally recorded a conversation between Noah and Tyler, in which they were joking about an art scene. The tone wasn't like a joke. It was like someone describing a familiar action. And when you listened again, I knew something wasn't right. I heard details about cold water, about not leaving traces. I went to see Claire, the investigator. She was the only one who made me believe it was worth clarifying. Below, some people nodded. Claire looked at Mason, not with a look of gratitude, but with a silent acknowledgement between those who had stood on the side of those who couldn't defend themselves. In the middle of the session, the court adjourned to process paperwork. When they returned, an unexpected thing happened. Mr. Harmon, the father who was originally cold and dry, requested to speak. The entire room gasped softly. He stepped up to the podium, old suit, crooked tie, hastily combed hair. His face wasn't like someone who had come here to defend himself, but like someone who had just passed through a long dream full of ashes. "I didn't come here to protect myself," he began, his voice hoarse. "I didn't come here to explain why I didn't hug my daughter the last time I saw her." He took out a piece of paper folded in quarters from his pocket, slightly crumpled, but the handwriting was still clear. "A week ago, while the police were searching the house, they found a letter at the bottom of Ellie's drawer, where I had never looked since she disappeared." He looked up. "I ask permission to read it again." The courtroom was as silent as the grave. Mr. Harmon began, his voice shaking but clear word by word. "If one day I'm no longer by your side, don't call the police right away, because I'm not going anywhere. I just want you to open the window of my room and look out at the river. That place is where I always find peace, and I still hope one day you'll see that too. Even though you never say you love me, I still hope one time, just one time, you'll call my name, not because you're angry, just because you miss me." His voice went off key, as if broken halfway. The letter trembled in his fingers, each word as if read through 1,000 repetitions in his mind. It was just that today they had escaped from his lips. "I've read these lines dozens of times, but it's easier to read alone," he said, his eyes tearing up. "When a father stands in front of everyone and has to admit he's never said, 'I love you,' then there's nothing left to hold on to." He raised his head, looking around the courtroom. The once hard eyes were now sunken and blurred. "I wasn't a good father. I thought if I kept the house, kept the principles, then she'd be safe. But I didn't know. Ellie didn't need a rigid house. She needed a house that listened." He choked, then continued, slowly and intermittently. "Once she stood at the door of my room, asking, 'Do you think Mom would be proud if she knew I was studying psychology?' I didn't answer. I just nodded, then turned my back. I should have turned around. I should have asked her how she felt. I shouldn't have been silent for so long." And then, as the last layer of ice melted, he buried his face in his hands, bursting into tears. Not a screaming cry, but the choked sobs of a lost father. A cry that was late but so sincere that the entire room seemed to hold its breath with him. No one spoke. No one laughed. Not a single whisper. There was only a town, for the first time, silently grieving for a pain that was no longer just for one person. A pain that couldn't be reversed, couldn't be healed, but could be shared, with kind silence, with compassion, and with the acknowledgement. Sometimes love comes too late, but that doesn't make it less real. The final verdict was announced under the dim yellow lights of the courtroom. Noah Ellis, the one behind the plan, the one who directed the tragedy under the guise of art, was sentenced to life in prison without parole on charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, physical assault, and abuse of personal images. The court concluded the defendant's actions were calculated, manipulative, and inhuman to a serious degree. Tyler Marsh, the accomplice, the one who stood still when Ellie cried for help, was sentenced to 18 years in prison on charges of complicity in murder and illegal possession of covert recording equipment. The sentence acknowledged his cooperation after his arrest, but the judge emphasized, silence when knowing the truth is also a form of crime. When the sentence was announced, Claire only wrote 3 words in her notebook: "It's over." In the afternoon, Claire walked past the square, seeing a group of high school students rebuilding Ellie's memorial. This time not just flowers, but small pieces of paper, writing the sentences they had heard from Ellie. Silence is also a way to speak, as long as someone hears. The wind blew through, gentle as an apology, and for the first time, Claire saw the sunlight no longer stinging her skin. Only the sorrow remained for the things that hadn't been said, but at least they had been heard. The winter wind returned to Windermere, not bringing white snow, but just a cold wind, a thin mist blurring the glass of the coffee shops, and the shaky breaths of those who had experienced a winter the year before, the longest, heaviest, not because of the weather, but because a girl named Ellie Harmon never returned. Claire stood at the end of Waterloo Bridge, her hands in the pockets of her pale gray coat. Beside her, Mason knelt down to tighten the bolts for a small metal plate attached to the railing pillar. The plate was only larger than the palm of her hand, the words engraved in dark black ink, "Where trust was once lost, and also revived." Nearby, Clover, the small dog Ellie used to keep, was sitting close to the feet of a silent man, Mr. Harmon. His hair was almost completely gray, no longer with a cold look nor with a broken appearance. Just a father, taking his dog to the bridge every morning, standing for a long time as if counting every gust of wind that swept across the river. And he still didn't say anything, but this time perhaps it was no longer necessary to say anything. Claire didn't come here for work. She came to keep her promise, a promise that Ellie had never heard, but had been kept for a year. The wind hit her face but didn't blur her eyes. She took out an old phone from her pocket, not hers, but Ellie's, kept by the police as evidence. After the trial, it was returned to her family. Ellie's aunt, Mrs. Sylvia, who lived in the next state, sent Claire a scan of Ellie's diary, found in a box of old books when cleaning the warehouse. Claire opened the email, reading it again. The handwriting was crooked, but very clear. "If one day I'm no longer here, tell my story, so that someone else doesn't have to be silent like I used to be." Mason walked over to her. He had started working for a non-profit organization, helping children who were harmed by domestic violence. After the trial, he told Claire, "I can't continue as before," as if nothing had happened. She turned to him, handing him the phone. "Inside this is the recording you gave the police," she said. "I've recovered the final part, where Ellie spoke for the last time, before Noah cut the scene." Mason took it, not opening it right away, just looking at it like a sacred relic. Claire continued more softly, "This isn't just evidence. This is the voice of someone who once believed that life could be beautiful." Behind them, the sun rose slowly through the bare branches, not brilliant, but enough to reflect on the quiet water of the Waterloo River. Previously, this place was a peaceful resting place for the town. Now, it had become a place of remembrance. Not just Ellie, but also what people can do to hurt each other or protect each other, just by choosing to speak up. Clover barked softly, then turned towards Mr. Harmon. He bent down to caress its head. For the first time in the past year, Claire saw him sit down instead of just standing still. Perhaps he had read Ellie's letter over and over again. Perhaps he still listened to every word in that diary every night, no longer to find fault, but to find what he had lost a long time ago, the opportunity to say, "I love you." That afternoon, Claire left the town in silence. No greetings, no goodbyes. But on the back seat, she carried a small book, hand-bound, with a soft leather cover, in which was the entire diary of Ellie, reprinted into pages. Each page a day, the young girl tried to get through the loneliness that no one knew, find hope from the smallest things. A dog sleeping in her arms, a branch reaching out to the sunlight, a late reply message. Claire had read it dozens of times, and every time she stopped at the same passage. "Tomorrow, I'm going to walk to Waterloo Bridge. Not to run away, just to know that even if the world doesn't hear me, that water still reflects the sky. I just need someone to listen." The wind hit the car windows gently, but this time Claire didn't feel cold. And in the back, between the town that seemed to have fallen asleep, a small sign still stood there, waiting for someone else to come to read, to remember, and perhaps to believe that trust, even if it has been betrayed, can still revive once again under the quiet river. There must have been times when you felt like you were talking, But no one was really listening. Or worse, you were silent. Not because you had nothing to say, but because of the fear that no one cared about the truth behind the things that were too quiet. The story of Ellie Harmon is not just a case. It's a voice left in cold water, a trust betrayed under the guise of something called art, a silence that if no one speaks up will continue to be forgotten. But Ellie is no longer alone, because there are still people who dare to doubt what seems harmless, dare to stand on the side of the truth, even if it's so painful that it makes an entire town change the way they are silent. If you've read this far, perhaps you've also witnessed an unjust silence, of yourself or of someone else. And if that makes you flinch, please share this story. Not to stir up the pain, but so that the right things aren't buried in silence. Send this story to a friend, maybe via WhatsApp, someone who's going through confusing days, someone who needs to be reminded that there are truths that seem small, but when listened to, can save a human being. Because perhaps somewhere out there, there's still another Ellie, waiting for someone patient enough to listen before it's too late.